Someone once asked me if I was ever reborn, would I rather have $10 million or would I rather be born with all the knowledge and experience I've ever had? When I was younger, I used to think, yeah, I'll take the $10 million, no brainer. Not anymore. Given the opportunity, I'd choose knowledge and experience over money any day of the week. Everyone knows everything these days, or at least they think they do, so the value of truth is higher than ever. Over the past couple years, JZO has been a place of exploration for me. This whole thing started when my kids encouraged me to make a YouTube channel. I did it for them more than anything. Most of the ideas that I have stem from them in one way or another anyway, so it seemed like something that we'd all enjoy. It started by vlogging the journey of a project called Soft Like Fire back in 2010. From my music to my art to the nuggets of wisdom I leave along the way for my kids, it's always been for them. But I've noticed something exciting happening with this journey. I've met so many beautiful people along the way. People of all walks of life, rich, poor, strong, weak, happy, sad, all with the same questions about life and love and what that even means. Some people lost in the chaos of tragedy, while others are lost in the fantasy of what they think really matters. All with the same questions.
What does all this actually mean?
I've noticed at the end of the day that compassion is the language that brings the answer that most people are searching for. Compassion for others, compassion for strangers, compassion for our parents in the same way that we have compassion for our children. My gosh, isn't it time? And we can start with compassion for ourselves. I've said it before and I still believe it just as much today. If we ever want to see real unity, we got to forgive our fathers the same way we forgive our sons. Compassion for the leaders of our past by actually being the leaders of our own future. I've noticed a community forming around the idea that compassion can be found in any situation, whether it's forgiving yourself for something you did in the past or accepting the tortured past of another person's life and how they might have chosen to take it out on you. To understand that the light that we so desperately look for often starts with the spark that we can often find within ourselves. My life changed back in 2020. COVID is an era definer in that way. It changed everything for many of us. And in that change, I found something that I had never truly experienced before in my reality. Silence. And in that silence, I was reminded of promises made over the course of my life. I've been on many spiritual journeys over the course of my 40-year relationship with God, but I'd never been on a journey as intense as this one. I had therapists, doctors, pastors, gurus, teachers, and friends. I dug into the silence. I gave myself no choice but to be still. I had a lot of time for myself, a lot of time, to discover many promises made over the course of my life, some kept and some not. With the overwhelming majority of those promises being promises that I had made to myself. With all that silence, I gave myself the gift of time. I was able to really dig into things that mattered the most to me. This was the first time in my life as an adult that I literally hit pause on my life. And one of the promises was the promise I had made to my children. A lot of daddies will say things like, "I'll never do anything to hurt you," or "I'll always keep you safe." And then they'll even go on to say, "I'll never let anyone hurt you." It was easy for me to keep those promises I had for them when they were young. I could just cuddle them up in my arms and sing them to sleep. Then I started to understand that many of those promises were impossible promises. After all, my kids are young adults now. I mean, how can I keep my promise to always keep them safe? It's an unfair promise for me to make to them. After all, I promised my little girls that I'd never let anyone hurt them. I mean, I try not to be a helicopter parent, but where's the line? I'll always do my best, but will I always be there? No. What about the pain caused to them by other people in their lives? Did I keep them safe? Where was I at in all of that pain that I caused them? Because of all of the misconceptions of a situation or because I was having a bad day. Did they know that I loved them even then? So the promises I had made them over the course of my own skewed perception of life became muddled and fuzzy. How could I, a man, predict, or worse, dictate the life of another human being, let alone someone else hurting them? That would require me to control the actions of another person. Well, I can't do that. I'm not God. And that's where the key to my first promise was found. In realizing that God is the only one who had ever kept that promise to me in my life. Ever since I was a kid, able to understand the concept of something greater than I. Every day, my breath is proof of God's existence. And I believe that that same God will work for the good of the people that love Him. And my kids love Him. I refer to God as a Him because that is who I identify God as in my story. In the same way that I could understand why a woman would refer to God as a her. To me, God is everything. God is the first conscious thought of the universe and every thought up until this very moment. All of our thoughts, memories, lessons, knowledge, emotion, humanity, collectively wrapped up in one cosmic mass of mathematically perfect unison and conscious entropy. God. One God for one creation. All of us. I wouldn't say my life has been easy. It's not been difficult in the same way as others, but for me, the experiencer of my reality, it's not always been the easiest of lives. I've never truly gone without a meal. I've never starved to death. As a kid growing up, the normal patterns of a grocery stash gone light would surface itself by way of bologna and stale chip crumbs with the juice of an old can of fruit cocktail in my special little glass. No. The difficulties in my life were often brought on by my own misconceptions of who I was or what it was that I could offer someone or how I could fix them or how I might be able to improve a situation. And it started young. By the time I was a functioning adult, I was certified narcissistic, ADHD, codependent, autistic, ADD, and whatever acronyms you want to throw in there. I was screened for pretty much all of it and diagnosed for a couple of them. So there's definitely a mental health kick in this sauce, which is why healing from a life of undealt with trauma was crucial to the stability of my life. Whether it was growing up as a city boy from the country, getting my ass kicked, or having to learn to protect myself after I was sexually assaulted as a 10-year-old kid by a neighborhood bully. Or whether it was throughout youth group as a church kid, being the one that everyone felt comfortable sharing their problems with. I don't know why people have always felt comfortable opening up to me, but they did. And then carrying the loads with so many of my friends while we were teenagers, it was rough. Nowadays, with social media, it seems like everyone's business is everywhere, but not back in the 90s. Snitches got stitches back then, Or whether it was through the stagnant, passionless era of the life of an uninspired artist in the arms of depression, where suicide and I had several interesting conversations, where I was taught the lesson of God's nearness in the shadow of death by reminding me of the green fields of Psalm 23 and Him making me lie down in them. Or through my failures or heresy experienced through my 20-plus journey as a minister through a jacked-up church system. I still love my family. I still love the church. Or whether it was through the failures and fires of 2 broken marriages, or friendships lost, friendships I had to walk away from, friends that had to walk away from me, or on the couch with addiction to figure out how the f*** that just happened, and how important the recovery process is. Or many other things. That's what this channel is for. My failures are one of my favorite things to talk about. It's often where some of my most meaningful songs and art are found. Failure springs forth life in the get up and try again, It seems like more people identify with failure these days than they do with success. In my weakness, God is at His strongest. I'm always shown a lesson in my failures. Here's what I do know. Whether it was under the boot of that neighborhood bully as a 10-year-old kid, or in the eyes of someone that just saved my life, God has never failed me. So I trust my children with Him regardless. They have their own relationship with God, so it's easy to trust God. It's called belief. I'm still a dad, though, so, I'm going to be around. The promises I made to my children continue to manifest themselves through God every day, simply by their existence, by their breathing. The promise that I can make to them, I keep by living life with them, by spending time with them, smiles with them, pain with them. Ultimately, our time is all that we can control. I honor my children with the gift of my time as they honor me with the gift of their time. Another promise was to my dad, to take care of my mom after his passing, which I joyfully do every single day. Not because she needs it, but because she deserves it. We watch out for each other. She's also my friend. She's a strong woman who's taught me the value of putting others first. She's a holy grail that's paid her dues. She's taught me compassion, and for that I am grateful. At the end of the day, I had to figure out what promises I could handle and what promises God could handle. And that was the key. Evidence found in life by letting the old me die and choosing a new me every single day. Freedom is what I found. Freedom in understanding that in spite of every hurt, every betrayal, every failure, in all of that, God remained. There I was, still breathing. As pathetically as I am at times, there I was, evidence of God's existence through life itself. Then I began to look around at all the collective journeys of people around me, still breathing. Some beautifully in rhythm within their own story, while others, I would say the majority, still breathing in spite of any failure, personal or otherwise, in spite of pain and struggle in life, in spite of it all. There they are, still breathing. As difficult as it can be sometimes to see, there they are. Evidence of God's existence through life itself. So yeah, freedom is what I have found through this journey so far. The idea of this particular journey began back in 2007 when my views on who I thought God was started to shift. I noticed God was becoming very boxed in my own life as well as in the lives of those around me. And I couldn't understand that because I thought those around me, the church, my people, were pretty dang good people. But leadership and the system called the church with a big C was starting to confuse me. That led me to start opening up doors on my own, doors in my own life that had been painted with
Not allowed on authority of religion.
with warning signs of fear, manipulation, shame, guilt, confusion, hate, rage, anger, any other adjective that makes the same point. You get it. Over the course of this JZO journey, one of my objectives, along with sharing my experiences with my kids, has been to share as much information about things that have inspired me over the course of my life. So a massive portion of my time and studies leaned into things that were important to who I am as a human. Spirituality and artistically, my relationship to God has always been the most fulfilling parts of my life. So knowing everything I can about the nature of who God is has always been a driving force behind my life as a father, a son, a friend, or my art. For me, I love to know the history behind things. What's the story? I especially enjoy the history behind ancient spiritual teachings. The Tao Te Ching, the Bible, the Vedas, Gnostic teachings, the Upanishads, the Kabbalion, the Emerald Tablet, the more the merrier. Things like obtaining as much historical information about the man Jesus that I could. Jesus had been the most influential figure in my life, so it only made sense. As much as I tried to walk away from Jesus, literally walk away at times, he just kept following me. Until one day I turned around and noticed that it was the church, or more, religion, that I had walked away from. Jesus was there just the same. I started digging into historical documents, papers, maps, books, or any study I could find. Up until 2007, nearly every piece of study material I was using came directly from inside the walls of the current evangelical church system. My perspective was so closed off to what anyone else on the planet outside of the Big C church had experienced. I even went to college at a Christian university, which further promoted my own narrative to be right. I was very familiar with who Jesus as God was. So who Jesus was as a man was an important objective for me. I wanted to know what happened to Yeshua during those 18 years that the Bible just doesn't talk about. Also, I was interested in the perspectives that others have on God as the Creator. Information that showed me the fullness of that Creator, without the filter of man's fearful opinion or rules or various religious practices or any politicized religious agendas or traditions based on wars that have already happened. All of my research had brought me to one glaring conclusion: that I had been misinformed. The more I dug, the more I discovered the historical information that had been covered up or inaccurate or omitted or reinterpreted by our own history hundreds of years ago, before America was even a thought. Prior to my life in research, I thought America being 250 years old was a big deal. A long time. After all, I had been taught that the Earth had only been around for 6,000 to 10,000 years. So imagine my surprise when I discovered the actual age of the universe. Talk about a big boom. My mind was blown simply by understanding the expansive perspective of time and space. 247 years is a blink. As Americans, I believe it's harder for us to understand the perspective of time the way that older cultures do. We're still very much the new kid on the block. It wasn't even until the 1970s that much of the documentation ever made its way into our knowledge base. And more discoveries are made every single day. Think of all that knowledge that our grandparents and our parents were never made privy to. With technology, the exponential curve of knowledge is here and available to everyone. Anybody that wants to know anything can gain any and all information with basically nothing more than a thought. Sometimes I feel like AI took over my brain a long time ago, and I'm just now catching up with what it's like to be human in the first place. The internet has changed all of it. Information is now just a click away. And now with things like Neuralink on the horizon, knowledge is going to be just a thought away. The beautiful part about this journey is how close I've come to God because of it. How much I've learned about myself and my art. I mean, I've always enjoyed music. I've always been healed by my art. And God has always been the inspiration for anything that I would consider good to be in my life or my art. But all the information that I had gathered had led to knowledge. And that knowledge led to understanding. And that understanding led to believing. Believing in God in ways that I never even knew were an option. God is an infinite paradise, not a dungeon tomb. The church seems to be painting a darker and darker picture every day instead of shining the light of the world on it. The message that Jesus had of loving and encouraging others on their own spiritual journey got way bogged down. It's gotten so bogged down. Most people outside of the church don't really want much to do with Jesus. I've always wondered why that is. I guess I always assumed it was a me against them kind of thing, like Bloods versus Crips type stuff. So I would oblige. If someone didn't want to talk about God, I'd just talk about something else. Or I'd try to, but sometimes I can't shut my mouth. The more I actually started to listen to people, the more I began to understand how little people actually know about Jesus. Even from Sunday school perspectives, grown adults, well-educated people, people in religion, people that can do your taxes, myself, all with misconceptions of who Jesus actually is or was. My life in years of ministry had afforded me many conversations with a full spectrum of people. And over the course of a good conversation, it's easy to learn that these are all people exactly like me, with the same struggles as me, with the same dealings of beauty and pain as me, with the same stories, just different characters. Stories often driven by a fear of letting God down. The difference is, I believe in the promises of God because I know the promises of God. They've been evident in my life and in the lives of others around me since I was a kid. You just have to pay attention. Not easy lives, virtuous lives, lives of compassion. Another awesome part of this journey has been discovering all the beautiful people that have found God in their own story in such personal and profound ways. Distinguishing between the parts of my story that had to do with the church and the parts of my story that had to do with Jesus were vital to who I am. So I knew I had to figure this out for myself. I had to feel everything that I knew. And trust me, there is nothing like being an EMT to learn how to feel what you think you know. You see, I had years and years and years of thousands of prayers and stories going through my mind and heart every time I would spend time with a patient. All of those years of struggle and pain manifested tangibly in my care. There was healing in that for me. As someone who is both a follower and a student of Jesus Christ since the age of 6, I see one of the biggest challenges that Christ followers will face in the near future is giving an account as to who Jesus actually is. I was taught to be able to testify on such accounts since I was a kid, so it's in my nature. But history is beginning to tell a different story. Historical documentation that puts my Savior here and here and here and here and here. Arguing about it is getting us nowhere. Those same people that preached, God doesn't change, are suddenly scrambling to keep up with the new rules. I believe one of the biggest discrepancies in documentation being the fact that Jesus wasn't preaching the same God that the Jews were, let alone condoning the religion that killed him. The Pharisees back in the day were the same ones that Jesus was calling a pit of vipers. And nowadays, most Jewish people simply don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Period. The end. Fiend. So who's wrong? Who's right? Both teaching out of the same books? Has God now suddenly changed? Here's the thing. Anyone that wants to argue about my beliefs will probably be let down. I try not to argue much anymore. I'd rather listen and respond appropriately with a great conversation. Or love you from a distance. Sometimes silence is the best friend that you can have. Here's what I can tell you that I do believe. I believe that I'm saved by the blood of Jesus, the mind of Christ, and the heart of God. I just don't believe it in the sense that Jesus is the only other way to God for someone coming from a completely different perspective of life. Perhaps Krishna is represented as the consciousness of Christ in someone from another culture, another lineage, another time in history. Perhaps Buddha, perhaps Muhammad, perhaps your mother. I've seen God through the faithful example of humanity. God is so much bigger than we can humanly give him credit for, including eons of people trying to figure it out along the way. I can only speak for myself, Jeremy Zeller, that Jesus showed me God. The beautiful thing is that we are all given the opportunity to find Jesus within our own story and to allow the mind of Christ to be given to us by the heart of God through understanding why he died in the first place. You got these people saying, he came back to life, and these people saying, he never did, and everything in between. It no longer matters to me if Jesus the man came back to life in his own human story, because he came back to life in mine. I understand the need for him to have physically risen from the dead in other people's stories, and I believe in the power of that belief. I know I needed it more than anyone I know. But Christ's consciousness coming alive within me in the midst of a reality that I could touch and feel in my bones is enough for me to have learned the lesson of Jesus' life through his death. I didn't need him to come back to life in his story. He came back to life in mine. And that is divine. He went to the cross for me the same he did for you. But he also lived for us, lived a life of virtue and teaching and knowledge, and left a historical path to spiritual healing in a way that our modern churches won't even let us talk about. But it's there. That pattern of virtue that leads to compassion, which leads to love. His life is easy to follow if you know him, even geographically, understanding what his mission was. Similar to myself and Christianity, Jesus was a Jew that left Judaism. He was a divine human and a beautiful example of a loving creator. He was trying to explain who God actually is to an uneducated social culture. But even language made it apples and oranges. So he used stories, allegories, timeless lessons of virtue, told in the language of love. Thematically, linguistically, mathematically perfect to stand the test of time. Jesus was trying to explain that God is found within the hearts and minds of men and women in the same way that God is found in a maple leaf, in the infinite rotation of the galaxies, all the way down to the smallest discoveries of quantum physics in the Mandelbrot set. I like to think that in some way, the essence of Jesus is now brought to life within the bones of those that follow his teachings and seeping into the DNA of a reality that you and I have the opportunity to interact with. Jesus understood the fullness of God, and his words and life have helped me rediscover how beautiful life is over and over, despite what others see around me as a falling world. The world is always falling. Like, literally. If you keep up with the new discoveries in space like the JWST, then you can see exactly how it's falling. And it looks different than it did as a kid. Current science is showing us a universal fabric of energy that creates a universal field. The scientific story we've known for the past 300 years has radically changed as new discoveries are found. Isaac Newton's universe operated like a machine with a separate human brain observing it. However, as studies continue to show, we are all part of one massive energy field and are actual participants in that flow of energy, tapping into a universal energy that includes every living organism in existence that ever was and ever will be. This is the reality that we discover as we follow the scientific rabbit holes that are opening up daily. The advancement of technology and the understanding of how spiritual principles coincide with so many of the patterns revealed in science. The crazy thing is that we are all, as humanity, being introduced to a history of creation that we never understood before. We never had eyes to see the way that we do now. With science, technology, history, and spirituality all revealing God right before our eyes. These new patterns of discovery and the perspective shifts that they afford are leading to an understanding of God on a scientific level that are daily blowing the minds of scholars, scientists, and professionals. The rocks are literally crying out. And now we live in an age where scientists are believing in God and religious people are still claiming, "Nuh-uh, he's ours." The further we zoom out, the more we realize it looks the same as when we zoom in. God is everywhere. Jesus knew that way back then, even on a scientific level. His language was plain, precise, full of allegory, and rich with wisdom. He showed me the way by his life, lessons, and love absolute. He made it easy to love people by establishing a language that saw through the history of people's karmic lot in life. He saw through the rules that had been written down over millennia that had nothing to do with God's intent for the children of earth. Rules turned into battle lines between families, and generations began to form their own paths of progress that were based on power, money, and control. Fear was the weapon. Jesus saw that the words of God had become distorted over the course of man's history. I see the same thing happening today. It's gotten confusing. If you read modern scripture through the lens of Jesus, it gets very easy to see the narrative. And in my personal opinion, Jesus Christ is the best example that humanity has when it comes to compassion and love. His teachings alone have created vibrations that carry through in the minds and hearts of countless souls. Part of this journey is also trying to help some of my friends with what's happening in today's spiritual culture. It's heavy stuff to contemplate when you've given your entire life attempting to live and communicate with God, and it feels like things are going off the rails. And that's what I believe. I do the best that I can to live my life through the lens of Christ to guide where I go, what I do, and who I get to meet along the way. I'm choosing to do my best to spread the good news of compassion and the belief that it can be done. Conversation, music, art, just life, whatever that may be, and however it may apply to your story or mine. Sometimes on this channel, you'll get me blabbing about my family. Sometimes you'll get me blabbing to a meth head. Sometimes you'll find me on here blabbing with a meth head about my family. I believe there is good news to be heard in any conversation. You have to dig. You have to expand the story sometimes. I also believe that listening doesn't equate to agreeing. Just because I speak to someone that has a different belief than I do doesn't mean that I am abiding by their belief system. For that very reason, the different perspectives from people is something I look forward to. The more conversations you have with people that you don't necessarily see eye to eye with, or people that just flat know more than you, the more you educate yourself, the wiser you become. If your beliefs are so fragile that a conversation scares you, it usually means that your beliefs are shallow, uneducated, unconfident, typically come from a belief system that was inherited from someone else in your life. Just because you listen to someone doesn't mean you agree with them. Opinions are like cooties. They're only real to those that believe in them. Otherwise, it's just a suggestion. People have told me my whole life to keep that God stuff to yourself. Well, I'm finding that there are actually quite a few people that love to talk about how or where they met God. I want this to be a place to celebrate those conversations. I also think it's important for people that do believe in God to actually stop for a minute and actually listen to why some people don't believe. What is it about their story that makes them believe that God is not real? Some people love to talk about this stuff but have no one to talk to about it. Over the course of this process, it's become easier and easier to recognize the portions of history and scripture that have been used to propagate an agenda that keeps people close enough to control but safe enough to not scare away. It's not just the Christian church. It's everywhere. I just happen to be raised in the Christian church. Therefore, my mindset and conversations were always based within that dimension of thinking. It's the same way that a plumber might look at two tubes and see a faucet, whereas if I saw two tubes, I might see a musical instrument or make a piece of art. The parallels of our understanding come from whatever each of us know as reality. My reality, for a very long time, was the reality found within the walls of the Christian church. I was born into it, raised by it, even employed by it. So that is where much of my perspective comes from. But it can be equated to pretty much every other major religion, corporation, government entity, church, or state. During COVID, just as many others, I found myself right smack dab in the middle of my very own hero's journey. It truly was the first time in my life that I had allowed myself to be myself and gave myself all the grace needed to take that journey. By continuing to pursue the fullness of God on this journey, it continues to be a passion of mine and is the greatest inspiration of my art. I learned who God is through Jesus. His language and teaching made the most practical sense to me. He's the best interpreter of the language of love ever. So naturally, I wanted to know everything about him and where his life took him. If he is the Savior of humanity, I wanted to know what those 18 years were like that the church doesn't talk about. And so I did. I went on that journey. And what I found is I found myself. I found myself by taking the steps that Jesus took and understanding why he learned the things that he learned and understand why he came back to the people that he loved to explain the things that he knew. He was God, and he was trying to tell us that we are divine as well. There's no telling where you found this part of the JZO journey or when. Maybe you caught a recent show. Maybe it's 1,000 years from now. You're just chilling. Now it's called Yizzle Tizzle, because Snoop Dogg bought YouTube, so it's a future thing. It could be from the music that I've been doing. It's been awesome getting out and playing again after 10 years. Thank you to everyone that's been coming out. It's always good making new friends. This journey with my voice has been a blast. I truly thought I was done singing somewhere back in 2008 and again in 2018. Well, really in 2018, I thought that I was done. So it's been quite awesome. But I was reminded of the reason I stopped singing in the first place. About 10 years ago, my son Malachi was getting ready to start his life as a football player in elementary school. And I, for the life of me, didn't want to miss out on all the things I knew I would if I maintained the touring schedule that we had. Both of his grandfathers and mine played football, so there was a cool excitement amongst the patriarch. Not to mention, selfishly, I wanted to see my son grow. So I stopped touring to focus on being a dad. It wasn't just me in that regard. The guys I was touring with at the time were all in the same boat. Kids at home, gotta go be a daddy. I was blessed to be with a group of guys who understood the appropriate response to the situation at hand. Our families came first, and they still do. I'll always be grateful for my seasons with Poor Man's Riches. Many of my roots came from that tree. Here's the thing. My son just graduated this past month, and we just celebrated his 18th birthday, which means it's time once again for me to continue my life as an artist and to continue to fulfill a promise that I made to myself, my family, and most importantly, to God. Little did I know that with the perfect combination of COVID and life circumstance, I'd feel so passionately about what God is doing with my life, including my music, again. I feel like God's honoring the commitment that I made 10 years ago to step off the road and take care of my family. And I'm so grateful for that. Don't get me wrong. So many aspects of the past 10 years have been a chaotic train wreck, including my life as a dad, which is one of the reasons I love this channel. I get to actually talk about all the beautiful chaos that moves my family and inspires my art. I'm infinitely proud of myself and my family for how we've navigated the waters of being a blended family and working together to make the kids our number one priority. The kid's mother included. Once we figured out this whole co-parenting thing and allowed God to move, our family was healed. I love her and her husband, Justin. She's the mother of my children, and he's one of my best friends. They're family. My music is my therapy. I don't ever feel closer to God than when I'm singing. So if you've found this channel through my music, welcome. Maybe you found JZO from my art and storytelling. Again, those of you making it out to the Oxymedia art shows, thank you. I still can't believe what we went through to pull off the very first show in November, but thank you to Danny, Ron, Gwen, and all the folks at Maynard's that helped us pull that one off. To this day, it's been one of the most special JZO shows that we've ever had, so thank you to all the art people that have found your way into my life. It could be from my background in the church, and if that's the case, then thank you, genuinely, for being here. I understand that some of the God stuff that I talk about can make you a little squirmy, but hang in there with me and at the very least join the conversation. Or don't. Just listen. Many of my conversations often include the spiritual part of my journey and my personal involvement as an Americanized, evangelical, non-denominational, westernized Christian is who I had become. So that is the vision that I had to get corrective lenses for. But it can and should be openly talked about for people that have gone through some real spiritual, emotional, and mental healing and still know and love the church. We all have a perspective of the same language of love. God gave us that. Regardless, for those of you that have joined the journey, welcome. Howdy. Namaste. So, what is Jeremy Zeller and the Other Side? I'm still figuring that out for myself. I know it definitely involves music. Definitely involves art, definitely involves this channel and some kind of podcast. JZO shows are like a family reunion. My songs are like a mix of a summer playlist and a fireside hangout. I love to talk about God, obviously, but I also love to talk about humanity. I like to talk about history. I love to talk about comedy. I had a moment while driving down the road this past week. I was listening to the Theo Vaughn podcast episode with Louis C.K., and I got to laughing at myself because I was smiling like a schoolboy listening to them open up with each other so intimately and emotionally about their childhood. Sometimes I use this phrase, I say, I'm in heaven. Well, basically, all I mean by that is that in that very moment, there's nothing else that I can think of that I would rather be experiencing in that moment. It's a perfect moment. Well, Theo, you gave that to me this week, so thank you. I was just driving down the road and I had a legitimate moment of conscious clarity thinking to myself, wow, my heaven actually includes two men opening up to each other intimately and emotionally through meaningful conversation. It was beautiful. I laughed. And yes, it was heaven. Comedy is one of my first loves, so goofy projects are always fun for me. I like to learn about skateboarding, fishing, science, theories, conspiracy, gaming, sports, food, music, obviously. I love to talk about other belief systems, other perspectives. The more the better. The point is, if you are here, I would like to invite you on this journey with me, to have those conversations with along the way. Whether it's coming to a show and talking to me or ending up talking with someone else, my shows promote engagement. Engagement with me, engagement with others, but most importantly, engagement with yourself. Engagement with God even. To let go of your anxieties for a couple hours and enjoy some great music, some real stories, and a compassionate community. That is what I love about the typical JZO show. There's been a couple interesting shows, but for the overwhelming majority, the shows have all been incredible. Please come out and say hi. And if you haven't already, join JZO social media accounts. The best way to keep up with things is to just join them all. I tend to be very random with my content, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm praying to God that He will send me help. There are several things that I'm excited about in regards to the JZO journey, and I'll keep you posted on all that with my socials. So if you're not following yet, just find me on most of the platforms. YouTube is going to be the best place to keep up with most of the stuff. But there's also Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Music, Patreon, blah, blah. But Patreon is a much appreciated one that I can't wait to finally get going. Your support is the only way that I can even do this. So please follow along. Please share the Oxy Media drops and the videos, the music, the art that we create together. It means so much to me and to everyone else involved in the project. The message is compassion for ourselves and for others, with others. I'm tired of talking about hate. I'm tired of hearing about how terrible life is. I am choosing to talk about the things that I love, and I'm choosing to focus on the things that make life beautiful, and that just happens to be us. I'm rooting for you. I mean it. When you listen to people's stories, you gain their perspective, you feel their emotions. It becomes very easy to find compassion in any story. I believe compassion is consciously understanding the state of another person's experience of reality and acting upon it with kindness, forgiving the cosmic or karmic patterns of history that have created their own reality or our own. We can be hypnotized by our environment and life experiences without even knowing it. Compassion is found in the story. Not always the chapter, but it can often be found in the story. So that's why I'm excited about this particular chapter of JZO. I am so excited to start season 3. I've been waiting forever, it seems like, to get going on this thing. But everything is rolling. My son has graduated. I'm grateful more than I could be for your existence. And that's why, this place, JZO, this YouTube channel, it's going to be the best place to keep up with this particular journey. We've got so many people lined up to talk to. I'm going to be taking you along on shows as I tour around. We're going to be meeting people and telling stories the whole way. I'm also super excited about the new conversations to be had this next season about autism awareness. As you know, season 2 is focused on autism awareness. This has led to some amazing conversations that I can't wait to share. I've also come to realize just how dismal autism awareness is where I live. But the beautiful thing is that other people are starting to take notice too. We just had our first official Autism Awareness Festival called A Day at the Park in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and it was incredible. It was more than I could have prayed for. I live in Lawrenceburg. There's not a lot of awareness where I'm from. Well, little by little, hopefully we can change that. So yes, raising autism awareness will continue to be a part of this next season. Why, you ask? Because it's personal for me. I did not fully understand myself or my brain until I was diagnosed as an autistic adult. By understanding the science behind it, it's helped me define certain thinking patterns and behavior patterns that were unhealthy for me and change them. I've seen how beautiful those same understandings can be achieved through effective therapies and therapists. I've also seen how limited the options of families trying to get that help is. I've seen how families that felt they have no options available suddenly get plugged into just the right program and their autistic children get the guidance they need. Most people are completely unaware of the struggles that families go through. So yes, I care very much to at least increase the number of conversations that people are having about the autistic community. If you want to know more about my personal journey with autism, check out the episode, I Suddenly See in Color. And thank you, by the way, to those of you that have reached out about the video and the song and everything. I really appreciate your encouragement. It meant a lot. Continues to mean a lot. So thank you. I'm trying to do what I can to start moving the needle of humanity back towards the light. I'm still trying to figure out what all of this even is. What I know is that whatever God is doing in my life, it's important enough to myself and to those around me to share with anyone curious enough to listen, and to at least try to spread compassion through music and storytelling. Alan Watts once said, "I'm not trying to sell you on this idea in the sense of converting you to it. I want you to play with it. I want you to think of its possibilities. I'm not trying to prove it. I'm just putting it forward as a possibility of life to think about." Well, I want you to fall in love with yourself so that you can fall in love with others. To understand another human story is to understand the emotion and perspectives one has overcome to be here, still breathing. I'm finding that there are actually people everywhere that love to talk about how or where they met God. I want this to be a place to celebrate those conversations. Thank you so much for hanging out. Come catch a show, leave a comment, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. I truly do love you, and I am rooting for you. Welcome to Season 3. Let's do this.